What's up, everybody? I'm Rebel. With me, I have Bonk and Tiny Elephant, or King Bonk, I guess. And what are we calling this? Are we calling this Prospect Plebs?
Yeah,
Yes,
we're
for
calling it the
now.
Prospect
Working title.
Pleps.
Yeah. So this is Prospect Plebs. We're gonna talk about the last week in RSC and the prospect tier and everything that's going on. And first thing we got today is for the first season we have power rankings that are coming out weekly, I believe. And we have the first week's power rankings for Prospect. Any thoughts, guys?
So coming into the season, power rankings are a tough thing to do, especially when it's your first time as a committee presenting them. I know as because I'm the captain of Firecrackers that
Yeah, I gotta get that in there.
that we were really happy to be number one, but I think a lot of why we were considered number one came from both probably the fact that we had someone people were already recognizing as a very mechanical player in SXD. And we were also working with the benefit of having Pyth, who people recognize, and then myself, who went second overall. And so I think those things kind of, along with our 10-2 record, made us a really popular pick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think with the benefit of hindsight, even I would not have put us that high going into the season. On the flip side, Gallimimus,
Well, I'd
until
like
they
to
got
point
their
out
set
that
three.
I did take that poll before the power rankings even came out, and the community of prospect players themselves voted you guys number one as well. So this is not the only poll you guys have topped. So
Oh yeah, oh for
there's a
sure.
lot of hype, I
Um,
think, surrounding Firecrackers with your guys' lineup, you, SXD, and Pyth. I know there's what's I feel bad now. What's the other guy's name?
Daikuch, which is
Yeah,
a great
he's on
name.
there too. And I actually watched some of the replays, and I saw he got some good play time in too, and he was actually making moves. But I think you don't even need to see his name to realize this is already a stacked team.
Yeah, that was the dream, and I think it's still very much a real one. And
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk about that later. My other observation coming in is that Gallimimus really suffered from. They have a great starting three,
Mm-hmm.
um, but they did a lot of rotation, and some of the people weren't able to play in the preseason, so their preseason record
Yeah.
record did not at all indicate the value and ability of some of their players. And I
I
think that's bore itself out.
I think that's true. Bonk, is there anything on here that stands out to you?
Honestly, the fact that I'm gonna butcher this name, Gallimimus,
Gallimimus,
Galla,
yeah.
whatever. Yeah, the
Gallimimus,
fact that
Mimus.
they just got 16th because I've faced them before,
Yeah.
and they were a
Did how
solid
did they do,
team.
how
I've
did they
realized.
do in preseason? I didn't pay attention to the preseason.
We swept them in preseason in our first
Okay.
series.
Wow. What
Um,
a
And I don't think they had any series where they really looked dominant coming in. And some of that I think was the rotational aspect. They were really trying to find their fourth player who worked well together.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't see any major surprises. I think this, based off what we saw in the preseason and roster lineups, this is a pretty accurate representation of what you could probably expect coming into week one.
I would agree, considering the sample size we're working with, which is 2 series of 4 games.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of what you're going to get in a power ranking is based on your impressions of individual players. You have no real idea yet of who can rotate, who can't,
Mm-hmm.
who wants to play together, and who's kind of like iffy. So
I
I
want to
think
take
for
a
overall, it
one.
represents that.
I want to take one look at the top five, and I want to get everyone's opinion if they think that this top five is everybody in here is deserving of top five.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think I've played any of these teams, but I've played Pioneer. I take that back.
Hmm.
In a scrim, I believe. I think Pioneer, Dolphins, and Firecrackers are 100% definitely top five worthy coming into the season. I know Airbuds are good, and they're probably top five. Supernova is my question mark.
Super. So my impression is that Supernova came in with not just hype but talented players who people recognized. Um, for me personally, I think they should have been 12th and Wobegong should have been third to start the season because that lineup was so specifically tailored around the strengths of their two best players.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that like I knew because I talked to Avid Reaper and I've played with him so much and know what he needs to be successful. And that's not something you're gonna get if you're power ranking prospect and you are an elite. Like you're gonna look at that and be like, let's look at what they did and what stats they produced, not necessarily have the ability to, or even want to necessarily spend the time to like investigate who's meshing and who's not.
Okay, before we get out of this rankings, I do want to point out that I was very surprised with the number 6 ranking of my team, Cucumbers. Just gotta throw that out there.
I will say I was too.
Yeah, our lineup's not. I believe our lineup is solid. I think we've gotten a lot better in the past few days, but I don't think it's a lineup that people look at from the outside and think they're gonna be a team to beat. I think we're more of an underdog kind of team.
They don't necessarily fear you.
Yeah. So I was surprised to see the 6th. I was like, okay, I'll take that.
While we're here, Bonk, where would you have put yourself going into the preseason?
The team or me myself?
The team. I'm not going to make you make a judgment about your own ability.
Well, during the offseason, every player from the previous team either retired or got traded or cut. I was the last one remaining. So it was a clean sweep of the team. I became captain. And honestly, I wouldn't have put us in the bottom 5. I would say somewhere around lower middle.
The self-confidence. That's fair.
I mean,
fair.
So I think that's a totally fair perspective to have, though.
Yeah. I agree. You guys want to move on to the outcomes of week 1? Or are we still got a lot to talk about?
Let's move on to the outcomes for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so here we got on Monday on the left and Wednesday on the right, and let's just point out a few key games from each day. I think for Monday, we had the 4-0 sweeps of Firecrackers, which is kind of big, and we'll more on that in a little bit. We also had a 4-0 sweep of Breadsticks, which is Bonk's team. Other than that, everything seemed pretty tame. There were a couple 1-3s, but for the most part, there was a lot of 2-2s on Monday. Kind of uneventful. I think Wednesday is where we start to see a bigger separation. We get a few more 4-0s. I think there's 4 total, and then
there's only 1 2-2.
Yeah, there's only 1 2-2. So there's only one tie of series in Wednesday. Any thoughts on any of these games that you guys were keeping an eye on or anything like that?
So, obviously, as 2 of the teams that got swept, our perspective is going to be a little bit warped. I think week 1 or match day 1 is really representative of what can be the parity in this league. There's a lot of teams that I think at their best can 4-0, and there's a lot of teams that I think don't have the strength as a unit, at least at this point, to avoid getting swept if things go bad. And so instead, what you see a lot of is a bunch of 2-2s, where a lot of games snowball, or they're just so close that, a couple of unlucky breaks and a team won by 2 goals when it was really a 2-2 game. So I think it was very representative of where we're at so far in Prospect. Match day 2, on the other hand, I think really started to lay out some of the differentiation between teams. I think doing my own research, kind of looking at who has played who, there are some paper tigers still who we have no idea if they're going to be good when they face the actual really top tier teams in Prospect. At the same time, I think there are teams that are 2-6 like mine, or 0-8 like Bonk's, where there's a lot of room for growth and improvement, and I don't think that's representative either of where they'll be in 2 weeks. So when I look at the results, I see a lot of indicators of what could be potentially either great success. Pioneer looks great in my eyes from what I've seen of what they've done. Wobegon's the same way. And some teams like Zomberries, where they've 2-2'd both times, I thought they were really, really good when they played us. They made us work hard to bounce back and get a 2-2 in the second match day. And so I don't think that's representative yet of who they can be in the long term.
One thing a couple of games that I want to point out is, first of all, Gorgons, look at them. 2-2 on the first day against Supernova, who was placed 3 in the preseason rankings. And then, my bad. I just called them out on a sweep. I thought it was 4-0 against Isopods. Okay, well, that's a moot point now. But let's look at Supernova. I did question whether or not I thought they were a solid top 5 pick. I definitely think they're one of the better teams, but maybe some stuff to work on. First day they go 2-2. That's good. A lot of teams went 2-2, so I don't think you could have asked for a better. It would have been hard to ask for a better outcome on Monday, given that only 2 teams 4-0'd. And then on Wednesday they lose 3-1 to Snow Owls, and I don't know where Snow Owls was ranked exactly. 1 second. They placed. Let's look at the rankings. Snow Owls on here? No, they are not.
They are not in the first week.
I guess that brings up some questions around, do you think Supernova is able to hang with the better teams in Prospect? What do you think, Bong?
It's too early to tell, or really too early to answer that question. As it has been mentioned, it's only been the first week. A lot of time for improvement, growth, or regression. Anything could happen. Who knows that they sweep the league?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it's just a major question mark.
I agree. One thing I want to point out, my other Tiny in Prospect, Tiny Potato, is on Storm Drizzles specifically. And one of the things that came out of that first match day was they ended up going from a 2-2 draw or a 2-2 tie to winning 3-1 because of a forfeit. So while I'm excited for them and the record they have, things look a lot different. And I know this very well as sitting 2-6 instead of 3-5 or 4-4. Things look a lot different when you're 6-2 versus 5-3.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would agree.
I think there's a lot of things that we don't know yet in terms of who's good and who's not. Personally, I think you can make judgments about maybe 4 teams total and none of the good teams, because I honestly don't know where they're going to fall. You can make judgments about my team and the fact that we just got our butts kicked against Gallimimus, and that's a fair point.
Yeah.
You can make judgments about realistically Urix, because Urix got their butts kicked against Wobegongs, and it was very clear from watching those replays that they just didn't have the mechanics to keep up with Wobegongs. But that doesn't mean they can't get there. In fact, I expect they will. That's a GM who's known for his mechanical focus, and there's still plenty of time for them to kind of figure out how to address some of the weaknesses they're having. And so there's very few teams I can even like make a solid judgment on past the next 2 weeks, because there's going to be so much room for growth.
Speaking of growth, let's get into our headlines. The first of which is Firecrackers, your team, off to kind of a shaky start. As we mentioned, they the first game on Monday, they got swept 4-0, and then they 2-2'd on Wednesday. And these games were after coming into season on both polls that were conducted as the number 1 team. There was a lot of hype, I think, surrounding the team. I guess the question is, what does this mean for Firecrackers, and what does this mean for your team going forward? What do you guys have to do to recover?
So my perspective on this is twofold. As people know me, they know that I'm very competitive, very driven to want to succeed. So after our first 0-4 loss to Gallimimus, I did replay review on the first 2 games, because those were the 2 that we lost in OT. We tilted hard just as a unit after game 1. Game 2, if we had won instead of losing in overtime again 3-2, I think we probably would have tied that series 2-2 against them. But that tilt just ended us. So I spent about 3 hours doing replay review, writing out individually what I think we all needed to work on. I was super hard on myself about my total lack of passing, my inability to finish plays.
I noticed. I think, did you take yourself out of game? Was it 3 or 2?
I took myself out of game 3.
Maybe it was 4.
So I
was
sat
that a
game
team
3.
decision, or was that just you?
So my decision going in was that no matter what the result was, I was going to give Thaikuch 3 games. And so at that moment, I felt like I wasn't delivering, and I also felt like I needed to take a step back and watch a game, potentially to at least save some tilt and maybe win game 4. Looking back, I kind of wish I'd stayed in, because I think we could have maybe done something that game. But at the same time, it is what it is. Moving forward, we tied 2-2, and it was really good. And there's a lot of positives that I feel about that team that if you'd talked to me on Tuesday night, I would have been way more emo about. So I think there are good things for us. It's just you got to deliver. We have another bad week this week, and suddenly things will not necessarily dire. But if we're 4-12, that's a real moment of reflection and trying to figure out what we can do to change, for example.
Well, I'll tell you, and I'll be the first to say this. I'm gonna keep my eye on Firecrackers going forward because I don't think they're out of the season by a long shot. I think this might have been a little bit of a wake up as far as like what they need to fix and what you guys need to work on. But I think you guys are probably still one of the better teams. Now, when we get to our predictions later, you'll see that I don't think either one of us placed you in the top 10, and that's just because we're predicting what the committee's going to do. But I still think Firecrackers is probably a top 10 team. So I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to that.
I appreciate that.
Any comments? Well,
Yeah, Bonk, what do you have to say about?
I got nothing to add on that.
okay.
That's fair. I've definitely spent probably 8 hours in the past week looking over replays, like thinking through what went wrong, but also thinking through like what we need to do in terms of communication and rotations. And none of this is like a sell speech on like why I'm such a great captain, because that's not what it is. It's just I do think that there's a lot we can fix, and a lot of time was put in this week to try to achieve that.
I think the next the next headline of week 1 is Gallimimus coming out 8-0. They're the only team that hasn't lost a game yet, and I don't know if there's ever been a team to go all season without losing a game. So they're probably bound to lose one, but they're showing very strong in the first week. Any thoughts on this? That they only placed 16th in the preseason, and I realize we talked about this a little bit before, and it was largely because they seem to have worked a lot more on their rotations going into week 1. Bonk, do you have anything to say?
So I will reference when we faced them.
Yeah, you guys played them Wednesday, right? How did that feel?
Yeah. I definitely knew the capability of some of those players, so I would have been happy if we just won a game. If I'm gonna be completely honest, because it would have showed that we can be a good team. And they played fast, they played well, but a thing that the scores don't tell us, or the record, that those games were relatively close. They were never a blowout.
I watched replays. A lot of their games they've won have been within 1 or 2 points.
Yeah. So
yeah,
they can finish games, but if they lose, or if they start trailing by, let's say, 3 or 4 goals, who knows what could happen? Maybe they fall apart, or either they come back.
That's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Speaking from my perspective as the team that got swept by them, it was 2 games where we went into overtime tied 2-2, and they made the plays to win an OT. And props to them. The biggest thing for them, and I spent a little bit of time last night talking to Pyth about this, is they're incredibly good rotationally at not letting their weakest aerial player be stuck making the play.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see that a lot in Prospect. In Prospect, a lot of times, how you feast on people is that you just keep putting their weakest rotational player in bad positions and let them screw up a rotation and give you an opportunity. At least in my experience so far, and they don't do that. And I'm not going to call anybody out because honestly, none of them are that weak. But just from watching replays, the one who struggled the previous game wasn't then immediately put in that role again. They'd put someone else in that role to try to create pressure, to create opportunities. They did really well not rotating all the way back. There's a lot of things that I think teams struggle with early on, just trying to get used to each other. That was very apparent they had spent the time to figure out.
So I guess the question now is, do we think Gallimimus is a team to reckon with going forward? I mean, they're sitting at the top of polls right now, but like we said, a lot of those games might be closer than one might think. And
if you're on top, everyone wants to beat you no matter what.
I think they benefited a ton from not being highly ranked. Not that we would have taken them more seriously or something, but I think there's a lot less pressure. There was a lot of pressure, and we reflected on this a lot as a team. We joked about being number 1 when we got, when you ran that first poll. And when we got it for this one, we still joked about it, but there's a certain amount of pressure that you just feel.
Yeah.
And that's part of why we tilted so hard, right? We were the number 1 team and we were down 0-2 in a series where we had lost in back-to-back OTs. And I'm curious.
That can get really frustrating
when that luck flips. Not that I think they're bad in any way at all, but when you have a lot of close games, sometimes that 50 that you won that ended up in the goal that won you in an overtime game goes straight into your net instead. And what happens when those situations start to happen? How do you respond? And I think they can. I think they're really smart in how they play. But I think that's where you really start to see if they can maintain this.
Well, there's certainly a team to watch going forward. I don't think if there's not any other comments, I think we're going to move on to our predictions for Week 2 power rankings. Is that fine?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're only predicting the top 10 because top 16 is going to be kind of a stretch, and let's be honest, no one cares about the bottom half anyway. No, I'm just kidding. So right here we got Elephant's top 10. If you want to read them off or explain any of your thoughts behind.
Yeah. So going through, I think Pioneer has the single best player in Prospect in Stealth King. The dude is a beastly twos player who
I
knows how to
played him
rotate.
in some scrims, and the dude was irritating to say the least.
He's got the right amount of just like he can do the 1v1 stuff that drives you nuts, but he doesn't do it at the expense of his team. And then Damon's a really good player. I rate him really highly personally. They have me, who they're using as a rotational fourth, but at the time of the draft was almost C3 and threes. Like the dude's got a ton of talent. They have a stacked roster, and I commend Wanma on what he did with that team. Galley, I think, deserves to be 2. If they win out again this week, then yeah, they'll be my number 1 with a bullet. Legends of Tomorrow surprised me. They did a great job constructing that team from scratch. And personally, for me, I think Drizzle has a lot of potential left. But they also are only 6-2 because of a forfeit. So I want to see a little more before I start moving them into my top 3 or 4.
So I want to ask about your number 3 spot. I think they popped up on all the way from week 1, from 13 to you got them at 3 coming up in this week. Why is that? I don't remember the record off the top of my hand, but I believe they're 6-2, correct?
Wobegongs is 7-1.
Okay,
They
they're 7.
are leading the league in shots. They're leading the league in fewest shots given up. They're fast. They're aggressive. They make you work super, super hard
Yeah.
for everything. And they have played together, at least Action Chugger and Avid Reaper, for like 2 weeks, since 2 weeks before the draft.
Well,
So they have got a huge lead in terms of just chemistry and focusing on doing what they can do best. It's something that when you play them, you can see that they've spent a lot of time practicing and really thinking through how can I feed him passes? How can I take advantage of the fact that Avid's probably like top 3 or 4 mechanically in the air in all of Prospect.
And we actually have this team on our schedule coming up Monday, and we did a lot of reviewing of their replays, and we've been playing a lot of ranked in preparation, and I think we have something to prove. I think this is a good team. I do not think that they are unbeatable. I think we have a good shot, and I'm hoping we can prove something coming Monday. So
I mean, I agree. We played them in a scrim.
Yeah. Starting
So
out the season as a team that went 3-5, I think if we were able to beat a team that's 7-1 like Wobegongs, or at least tie a series with them, I think that'll show a lot.
I think they have a great. The last thing I'll say about them, just because I really do think that they've done a lot of work to get to where they're at already, is mentality-wise, they're going and scrimming everybody they can that's better than them. They're not settling for bad scrims. They're scrimming their major team a ton in-house. They're really doing things to try to force themselves to be better than every other team. And whether or not that pays off, I can't speak to, right? There are plenty of talented teams. I think Pioneer's the best team right now. But I commend them for the fact that they're not accepting the fact that they dominated so far. They're really pushing themselves to be better. And I think your team could give them a great fight. I think your team could beat them. But I do think that there's something to be said for a team that dedicated themselves to learning how to pass and make great plays this early on, being rewarded for that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think next we have my top 10 rankings. And I have the only undefeated team as number 1, and I think I'm the only out of us 3 that did that. And I think that they've proved what they've needed to at this point. I mean, I know it's week 1 and it's only been 2 games, but I find it hard to go 8-0 in the beginning of season and then continue to have a bad rest of the season. I think that they might not be the number 1 team overall, but I think that this next week their rankings will show that they are, and they'll continue to do good throughout the season. I have Pioneer number 2. The same reasons you do. It's a stacked team. really good team. We played them a couple times in scrims, and they're one of the few teams I don't think we have beaten in a scrim or something like that yet. And I think they're gonna do really good. Any I'm trying to think of who else on here is I have Drizzle at number 4. What was their record for the
They're 6-2.
Yeah, 6-2. Yeah, I had them over Wobegongs just because, like I said, I watched the replays, and don't get me wrong, I think Wobegongs is a really good team. But I don't think that what teams have they faced?
That is their biggest weakness, is they have not played a team I would consider
Yeah, they
even
played
like
Templars
medium
Monday,
tier.
and then on Wednesday they played Urix, both of which I think Urix is like 1-7, and
Yeah, Urix is really struggling without Wither.
and then Templars they are what is that 3-5, so they're same as us. So yeah, that's my reasoning for putting them kind of low. Other than that, I think the rest of it kind of just reflects how the first week went. Yeah, so
I agree.
There's no questions or concerns on there. I think we can move on to Bonk, and you can kind of explain a little bit of yours.
Yeah. So I have the Wobblegongs as number 1. I looked at their stats, and honestly, their total points versus opponents so far, it's ridiculous. They have scored quite a lot of total points and have allowed their opponents to not score a lot of total points. And if you can balance having a top offense and a top defense, you're probably guaranteed making postseason.
I don't think there's a
But
question about that. Yeah.
Like you said, they may have not faced a good team yet, but I would probably compare them to the 49ers right now. Throughout their entire season, people said they'll face a real team, and now they're in the Super Bowl. So we'll see how it goes, see if they just silence anyone who says, wait till they face a real team. But I feel like they will take it to the postseason at least.
But I think that's a given, possibly. Okay, I think real quick we're gonna look at the conference standings as of week 1, and these aren't the power rankings; these are just standings based off what actually happened. And first we have Lunar Conference, and in Lunar Conference we have Pioneer at the top, 7-1, along with Wobegongs. They both we've talked about them quite a bit today, and they both did very good in week 1. The rest of the teams on here we actually haven't talked that much about. Is there anyone that kind of like surprised you with their performance, whether that be good or bad? Anyone?
I was personally surprised that Snow Owls did so well.
Yeah, they didn't even come in top 16 in preseason.
I don't know that roster super well. I didn't play a lot of them in combines. I didn't get a chance to play with a lot of them, period. So they're definitely interesting to me. I think it's great that we like same with Sparks. Honestly, both those teams didn't register on my radar at all, and I think that's awesome that they're both 6-2. It spices things up a lot that we're not just seeing the new people necessarily dominate, because that was one of my fears coming in, is that with that last second drop where a bunch of challenger level people dropped into Prospect, I was worried that infusion of talent was going to just like create a feedback loop. But instead, like, there are teams with players who have been here for a long time that are showing the value in like having those solid rotations and ability to communicate that is learned through experience.
Well,
Can I add a comment?
Go ahead. Feel free.
I am not surprised Sparks are 6-2.
Yeah, we played them last Wednesday, and they are a very good team. I think they were underrated going into the season. And I mean, we did get a little tilted in the second half of the series, and I think we as a team has improved since that game. But they are they make you earn the wins against them. I will say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been here for 3 seasons, and every time we faced the Sparks, they clapped us, to say the least.
Well,
and
are
they've
there
always
any players? Are there any players that have returned to that roster, or are they new?
Not that I know of, but they were always dominant in the regular season, but just could not take it home.
Well, the whole Electric Mayhem franchise is honestly one of the best ran franchises in my opinion in RSC. I think they do things very professionally, and they do things very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think also Kip made one of the moves of the draft, picking up Red Dime, and Zaya Red. They're both amazing players who didn't really flash at combines, as DEs, but ability wise, they're top tier. So I think he made a couple really smart moves that really amplified that roster in a way that going into the season, a lot of people maybe, including myself, didn't recognize, but it makes a ton of sense looking in retrospect.
Okay, I think we're going to take a quick look at Solar, and then we're going to have a couple games to watch going into week 2, and we'll be out of here. So this is the Solar. We got Gallimimus 8-0, followed by Legends of Tomorrow, which you said surprised you earlier in the stream, Elephant. And then below that, not much like shake-up, to be honest. It kind of follows something that you would probably expect coming into the season.
It really is. I mean, beyond me and our Firecrackers and Breadsticks, both of us languishing at the bottom, which is probably surprising to our individual selves, I think it's made sense. I think there's a lot more order to this conference, with Galley obviously being a huge surprise. But I think this is definitely the less surprising of the two.
Now let's take So let's take a quick vote, because I was expecting coming into the season that Solar was going to be the conference with all the talent, and after the first week, I'm not so sure. I think that Lunar has got the so far, anyways, has demonstrated that they got the teams to beat. What are your guys' opinions on that?
So, yeah, I mean, I would agree with that for sure. I think stats right now are also kind of a function of who you played, in terms of you're going to generate a crap ton of shots against certain teams, and other teams you're not going to generate any. Just because of how they choose to play and maintain possession and how they rotate. I think we'll see a lot more interesting stats in a couple weeks, and that'll really start to show where the talent gaps are, or where the talent really is concentrated. As you start to see teams that are paring down to starting threes, with maybe their fourth getting 1 or 2 games instead of full rotations. And as you start to see players really establish themselves as consistent threats. Right now, obviously, like if you look at the stats, Avid Reaper is dominant in those stats, and I think he'll continue to be. But he could just as easily have missed 6 more shots, and suddenly those stats don't look as good. You know what I mean? So I think we need to wait a little bit longer before we make any like broad judgments on player talent. But I do share your thoughts that it may be much more spread out than we may have thought going into the season.
Okay, before we get out of here, we have a couple games for you guys to watch going into week 2. And these weren't like voted on in any way, but I think they were probably the best matchups looking at the schedules. We have Monday, Drizzle versus Gallimimus, and I think we all had Drizzle in like our top 5 even, maybe. And we all had Gallimimus 1 or 2. So I definitely think that's a game to watch. And then for Wednesday, we have Snow Owls, who's kind of surprised us a little bit, and Pioneer, who we all thought very highly of. Will there be either of these games that you guys are particularly interested in the outcome of?
I believe Drizzle 3-1's Gallimimus. That's my bold prediction, but also I stand by it.
Yeah, bold prediction. Yeah, I'm gonna have to, like, for Wednesday, I'm voting in favor of Pioneer here. I think Snow Owls surprised us, and I think they're a much better team than we thought they were. But I still think that Pioneer is a stacked team, and they're probably gonna pull off the dub, at least 3-1. And the Monday game, though, that's a toss up. I don't have any clue.
Yeah. I think Pioneer wins on Wednesday also, but I could easily see Snow Owls, with some of the talent they have, being able to match the raw ability of Stealth King.
Your thoughts, Bonk?
Those are gonna be interesting.
I will make my predictions of the 2 scores, Drizzle and Gal. I'm gonna say 2-2.
Okay.
Break even. Okay.
And for Snow Owls and Pioneer, I say Pioneer takes it 3-1.
All right. Okay. Sounds interesting.
Well, I think that's all we got for today. Is that all for you guys? Any news for RSC you want to bring up or anything like that?
I mean, it seems to be running pretty smoothly. Obviously, the servers have taken a massive death today. But overall, I think that it's been a
Rocket
pretty
League
smooth
servers
start.
are dead. RLCS season 9 start of it was a little rocky today, I guess.
Yes, it was.
Okay,
This
well, if
wasn't a
that's all.
problem when Psyonix was in charge.
Well, I don't think it's a Silex or Epic issue. I believe it's the cloud providing services issue. I think it's ran on Google Cloud Services, and this is not the first time
Yeah.
GCS is crapped out. I'm surprised that Discord is running, to be honest, because they use
So
GCS.
what Devin released, he just actually messaged this out. So yeah, Google was having issues earlier, but now they're having issues on their back end. That long maintenance we had was to update Signet, and apparently Signet has decided that it didn't like the new update, so they're trying to figure out what's going on. So
Okay.
that's where we're at currently. Hopefully it'll be up tomorrow so teams can get some practice in before games on Monday.
Hopefully it'll be
And
up tonight.
be
I want to
good.
play some Rocket League tonight, man.
I know.
Same. Gotta live in free play, man.
Okay, well, we'll see you guys next week, hopefully.
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 All right. Thanks so much for having me.